The blind date had started out in silence, a sterile quiet that filled the upscale restaurant as the hours slowly passed. The gleam of city lights began to flicker through Belarus's tall glass windows, casting a soft glow over the tables. The murmurs of laughter, the clink of silverware, and the low hum of jazz set a sophisticated backdrop to the evening. But at one particular corner table, all of that faded into the background. Graham Hale sat alone, meticulously neat in his tailored gray suit, white shirt, and expensive watch. Everything about him spoke of control, precision, and the structured rhythm of his life. His gaze shifted once again to the screen of his phone, hoping for a message but finding none. He frowned. She was late. Not by a few minutes, but enough to make him feel the old, familiar sting of disappointment. It wasn't just about the inconvenience. It was about something deeper, a reminder of moments in his life when he had been forgotten, overlooked. A boy waiting on a doorstep for someone who never came. The seconds stretched and his jaw clenched. He hated this feeling. He rose to his feet, ready to leave, when a small figure appeared in his peripheral vision, darting between waiters and patrons. A little girl, no more than 3, with blonde curls and pink shoes, running with the sense of purpose. She reached him without hesitation, grabbed his pant leg and looked up at him, eyes wide and serious. "My mommy's sorry she's late," she said breathlessly, as if she had been practicing the words, as if they held more weight than anyone could understand. Graham froze. It was the first time in years that something had completely caught him off guard. The restaurant, the watch, the perfectly ordered world he had built, everything blurred for a moment. He looked down at the child, noticing the details that most people wouldn't have seen. The slouched sock, the tousled halo of hair, the tiny silver barrette that held a strand of her blonde hair to the side. Her eyes, so honest, so expectant, seemed to carry a weight beyond her years. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. "What?" the little girl asked, as if she had expected a reply. She tugged at his pants again and gestured to the chair across from him. "That's for her, right?" Graham slowly lowered himself back into his seat, his gaze never leaving the girl. Something inside him stirred, an old quiet ache that he hadn't felt in years. He remembered what it was like to be that child, sitting alone, waiting for someone who never showed up. He had spent his whole life building an empire to ensure that he would never feel like that again. And yet, here was this small child, delivering the message he never received. Someone cares. Before he could process his thoughts, a voice called from behind. "Maisie, Maisie, honey," a woman said, hurriedly entering the scene, her breath catching. She was wearing a simple navy dress, blonde hair spilling from a low bun, and a heavy tote bag hanging from her shoulder. "I told you to wait by the door," she continued, slightly out of breath. Graham looked up, his gaze meeting hers for the first time. The woman hesitated, then offered a warm yet rushed apology. "I'm so sorry," she said as she gathered the child into her arms. She insisted on finding you." The little girl, still clutching his pant leg, beamed. "I did it, Mommy," I told him. The woman laughed softly, a sound that was genuine and light, before turning to Graham. "I'm Laya Monroe," she introduced herself, extending her hand. Graham took her hand instinctively, noticing the firmness of her grip, the sincerity in it. No pretenses, no masks. A contrast to the world he was used to, where every handshake came with layers of meaning. "Graham Hale," he said. Laya's eyes flickered with recognition at the name, but she didn't comment on it. Instead, she focused on her daughter. "Maisie, can you say sorry for running off?" Maisie, ever the obedient child, nodded and said dutifully, "Sorry, Mr. Graham." Graham blinked, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "It's okay," he said, almost too softly. The maitre d' arrived then, unsure whether to intervene or just serve. Graham gestured slightly, signaling that they would be staying. As the two sat down, Graham couldn't help but observe Laya's calm demeanor, the way she adjusted Maisie into a booster seat with a tenderness that seemed to radiate from her. Every movement was measured, deliberate, filled with care. And when she sat down herself, exhaling deeply, Graham realized he hadn't even thought about the time anymore. He wasn't watching his watch. He wasn't worried about the minutes. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the urge to control everything around him. Laya met his gaze again, still slightly out of breath. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice soft now. "Looking back, I probably shouldn't have taken so long. There was a man who collapsed near the subway. I had to help. Her words were simple, unembellished. There was no performance, no dramatics. Just the weight of a truth she didn't feel the need to explain or justify. Graham stared at her, surprised by the raw honesty in her words. He had expected excuses, traffic, a phone call, a work emergency. He had not expected this. Laya adjusted Maisie's sandal, her hand lingering on the child's ankle for a moment before she straightened up. The ambulance was late, she added, as if the delay was just another fact of life. And Maisie insisted we still come, she added, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. I'm glad you did, Graham said before he even realized he had spoken. Maisie giggled and waved at a passing waiter, and Laya gave her daughter a soft smile before turning her attention back to Graham. I hope you weren't waiting too long, she said, sounding genuinely concerned. Graham hesitated, then replied, 17 minutes. Laya's smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly recovered. That's pretty long. Graham nodded, then surprised himself by adding, It's fine. Something about the simplicity of her apology, the way she offered it without defensiveness, without trying to explain it away, softened the tension he always carried. In his world, every second mattered. Every delay was a failure, a crack in an otherwise efficient system. But Laya had chosen to help a stranger over the clock. That, more than anything, unsettled him. He glanced towards the door where the maitre d' had been hovering earlier, now out of sight. He could have walked away. He could have chosen to leave, to stick to his schedule. By all logic, he should have. But tonight, logic wasn't in control. Something else was. You said he collapsed? Graham asked, his voice steady but curious. Laya nodded. I didn't know what happened. He just crumpled. People kept walking around him. Some people stared, but no one stopped. And you did, Graham observed. Laya's gaze was steady. I didn't think twice, she said simply. Maisie held my bag while I stayed with him until someone called 911. Graham studied her for a long moment, taking in the warmth in her eyes, the way she held herself so naturally, so grounded. It was a stark contrast to the cold efficiency of his world, where people rushed past each other, barely noticing one another, all masked in the facade of professionalism. But Laya was different. She didn't wear a mask. She didn't hide behind the barriers of time, control, or distance. She was present. Maisie reached across the table and grabbed a sugar packet, fiddling with it absent-mindedly. Laya gently took it from her, and the child's gaze drifted toward the waiter, distracted for a moment. Sorry, Laya said, looking at Graham with a small, apologetic smile. We're usually more organized. Graham offered a rare, genuine smile of his own. It's okay. He noticed how Laya's shoulders relaxed as if she had been bracing herself for an unpleasant interaction. Yet something had shifted between them. Something unexpected. Something deeper than just a missed dinner reservation. For the first time in a long while, Graham felt something new stir inside him. Admiration, maybe, or something quieter, more subtle. Something he hadn't allowed himself to feel for a long time. I thought you might decide it wasn't worth it, Laya said, as they both sat back. If I didn't think it was worth it, I wouldn't have come at all, Graham replied. His voice low, thoughtful, and in that moment, the tension between them, the cold, calculated world he had built and the warmth she brought with her, seemed to fade into the background. There was something here, something beyond logic, beyond precision, something that couldn't be measured, and Graham Hale had no idea where it would lead. She had arrived late, but not because she'd lost track of time. She'd made a choice, one that put someone else before herself. And now, as Graham sat there, something inside him shifted. He no longer wanted to leave, not even close. The waiter returned with a high chair, and little Maisie climbed in like she belonged there, like she dined in the most prestigious of places, or at least believed she had. Her small legs swung cheerfully as she tugged at the edge of the menu, pretending to read it with authority. Graham watched her with a mix of humor and admiration before turning to Laya. Is grilled cheese all right? Before Laya could reply, Maisie jumped in enthusiastically. I love grilled everything. Laya chuckled, her laughter light and lyrical. Graham felt something loosen in his shoulders. She's not joking, Laya said. If it's got cheese and grill marks, we're in. He nodded toward the waiter. 3 meals then. Grilled cheese, seared salmon, and 1 pasta. Hold the greens. He looked at Maisie, who beamed in approval.
You've done this before. Laya said with curiosity.
Graham smirked. Not really, but I've learned fast. Their conversation started slow, filled with the kind of surface-level talk most first meetings are made of: jobs, neighborhoods, daily routines. But something about this evening was different. Maybe it was Maisie, throwing in comments about elephant-shaped clouds. Or maybe it was the way Laya leaned in slightly when she listened, genuinely engaged. For once, Graham wasn't mentally checking compatibility boxes. He was simply there in the moment. Mid-sentence, Maisie lunged a bit too eagerly for her juice. The glass tipped, spilling icy water directly onto Laya's lap. She gasped and quickly scooted back, reaching for napkins and murmuring apologies. But Graham was already moving. Reaching into his jacket, he pulled out a neatly folded cloth handkerchief. He knelt slightly and dabbed at her dress, not intrusively, but with a quiet, deliberate care. Laya froze for a second. Neither of them moved. His hand paused, her eyes met his, and something subtle passed between them. The background, the music, the murmurs of the restaurant seemed to recede. "You're not what I expected," she said, almost breathless. Graham slowly pulled back his hand and refolded the cloth. "Neither are you," he replied. Her smile wasn't just about amusement. It carried layers of surprise, appreciation, maybe even a flicker of vulnerability. "Most men don't carry handkerchiefs anymore," she noted. "I'm not most men," he said. She looked down at the damp hem of her dress. "That's very clear." Maisie, unaware of the deeper shift in the air, munched on a breadstick. Laya brushed a crumb from her daughter's cheek and glanced at Graham. "Thank you. That was unexpectedly thoughtful." He shrugged, downplaying it. "It was nothing." But they both knew it wasn't. It was a moment, a quiet one, built not on grand romantic gestures, but on something far more telling: attention and care. From there, conversation flowed more freely. Laya talked about her job at a small bookstore, how it smelled like paper and ink, and how Maisie would often curl up in the reading nook while she worked. Graham, in turn, shared stories from his world, an arena of boardrooms and tech deals. These weren't tales he usually offered up, but tonight he wanted her to know. Maisie occasionally broke in with stories of dogs or preschool adventures, and each time, Graham leaned in, genuinely interested. The cold, polished vibe of Bellerose, the fine dining, sleek surfaces, silent staff softened around them. It stopped feeling like a first date. It started feeling like something new, something real. When they finally stepped out, the city was cloaked in twilight. The streets shimmered with reflected light from car windows and recent rain. Graham pulled out his keys. "I'll drive you home," he offered. "It's late. The city's not exactly charming at this hour." Laya gave a soft laugh and shifted Maisie to her other side. "Thanks, but we take the bus," he blinked. "The bus?" "She loves it," Laya replied, smoothing Maisie's hair. "It's her evening routine. She waves at every person we pass." Maisie perked up. "And Mommy lets me sit by the window." Graham hesitated. He was used to providing solutions to people nodding before he finished offering them, but Laya's answer wasn't defiant. It was simply firm, content in their way of doing things. They walked together to the bus stop. The sidewalk was cracked, and Maisie pointed out a tiny flower poking through. Laya crouched to admire it as if it were a priceless piece of art. "Do you live far?" Graham asked. 15 minutes by bus," she said. "We rent a small apartment near the library." He glanced at her. "Do you work there?" "At the library?" "No," she replied. "The bookstore across the street. It's quiet, and they let me bring Maisie sometimes. I also wait tables some evenings." Graham looked over. She didn't sound embarrassed or apologetic. She was simply sharing her reality. And that honesty, simple, unguarded, hit him harder than he expected. "You're busy," he said. "I try to be," she answered. "Bills don't pay themselves. And Maisie thinks food magically appears, so I try to keep the illusion going." He laughed, unsure whether it was her delivery or just the truth of it. She had a way of making the world seem less transactional, less calculated. "Do you ever think of doing something else?" he asked. "Of course," she said. "Don't we all? But right now, this is my life. And honestly, it's not bad. I get to read to my daughter, work around books, and sometimes meet strangers who turn into friends." There was no bitterness, no what if, just presence. And it caught him off guard. "Doesn't it bother you?" he asked. "How hard it is?" She turned to him, her gaze steady. "Life is hard for everyone in its own way. I just try not to let it make me hard in return." They reached the stop. The wind tugged at the hem of her dress. She pulled Maisie's jacket tighter and added quietly, "Kindness. That's what I want her to remember. Not how fancy our dinner was." The word struck him like a wave, soft but unavoidable. He'd grown up believing that success was armor. But here stood someone with no armor at all. No wealth, no insulation. Just love and quiet strength. And for the first time in as long as he could recall, Graham didn't feel elevated above someone. He felt grounded by them. After that night, their encounters weren't planned or polished. They met at park benches in local cafes. Sometimes Maisie colored napkins while they talked over lukewarm coffee. Other times they strolled aisles in her bookstore, steeped in the scent of paper and cinnamon tea. There were no rules. No performances. Just conversations and silences that didn't need to be filled. One Saturday morning, Graham arrived at the bookstore with a paper bag under his arm. "For Maisie," he said. Inside was a set of vintage fairy tales. Hardcovers illustrated, some with golden trim, not new but treasured. "She mentioned Cinderella," he said, "and I thought Snow White might balance things out." Laya smiled, eyes glistening. "That's incredibly thoughtful." "She also likes dragons," he added, slightly shy. "There's one in there somewhere," Maisie squealed in delight. "Are they mine forever?" "Yes," Graham said. "But you have to share them with your mommy." "I will," she promised solemnly. Later that day in the park, Graham found himself sitting on the grass, reading aloud while Maisie leaned against him. He stumbled through the fairy godmother's voice and Maisie laughed. "You sound like a robot." "I am a robot," he replied. "Fairy protocol activated." Laya sipped tea nearby, her smile quiet but unshakable. Graham found Maisie's shoes beneath a tree, dusted them off and placed them by her feet, neatly aligned. Laya noticed, said nothing, but her chest ached in the best way. Later that week she asked him, "Why do you do all this?" Graham shrugged. "You're the only people I look forward to seeing." That night, as she tucked Maisie in, Laya whispered, "We're not just visitors in his world, are we?" Maisie murmured sleepily, "He's our forever friend." And somehow that felt exactly right. They stopped calling it dating. There was no need. It was burnt toast and sidewalk chalk, quiet mornings and shared blankets. It wasn't romance wrapped in candlelight, it was something sturdier. Home. Then came the morning the world intruded. Laya sat scrolling through the speculative captions, some praising Graham's humanitarian heart, while others accused him of exploitative gestures. "That's not how I see you," he said, stepping forward. "I'm not a story you rescue." Her tears rose as she snapped at him. "I'm someone trying her best." Silence fell. Graham's eyes drifted to the small pink raincoat hanging by the door. He exhaled. "I didn't want this either," he said quietly. "Not like this." Laya wiped away a tear. "Then maybe you should go." From the hallway came the soft voices of Maisie. "Mommy, is he not coming anymore?" The question cracked something inside Laya's chest. Graham turned toward the voice but stopped himself. He looked at Laya one more time, guarded, trembling, her heart caught between survival and pride. He nodded once and walked away. No speeches, no promises, just the quiet click of the door closing behind him. 3 days passed. Laya didn't text. Graham didn't call. The world spun fast and loud outside, but inside Laya's small apartment, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Maisie had stopped asking where Graham was after the second night, though it was clear in her eyes she was still waiting. On the third evening, dust drawing shadows through the blinds, there was a knock. Laya froze. For a moment she didn't move. Then, her heart pounding, she walked slowly to the door and opened it. There he stood, Graham Hale without his usual armor. No sleek car behind him, no tailored suit, just jeans, a worn sweatshirt, messy hair as though he hadn't slept much. In each hand he held a plastic grocery bag full of dollar store snacks. He lifted one slightly. Ramen noodles, chicken-flavored, the spicy kind she liked. He lifted the other. Microwave popcorn and a chocolate bar that might be real cocoa but probably isn't. Laya blinked, speechless. Graham took a breath and looked into her eyes. "I'm not here as a CEO. I'm not here with statements or damage control or solutions." His voice was quieter now, steady, raw. "I'm just a man who'd rather sit on your couch than at any boardroom table." From behind Laya came a small voice. "Mr. Graham?" Maisie appeared in the doorway in pajamas and barefoot, holding something small and folded in her hand. She walked up and offered it to him. "This is yours," she said. "Mommy washed it." Graham looked down and unfolded the cloth. It was his handkerchief, the same one he had used that night in the restaurant. Carefully folded now, soft and clean. His throat tightened. "Thank you," he whispered, bending down to meet her eyes. Maisie looked up. "Serious? Can you stay this time?" Laya turned away, covering her face with one hand. She didn't want to cry again. Not in front of Maisie. But the tears came anyway. Graham stood and stepped forward slowly and gently, not trying to fix it, not trying to explain. He just stood with her. "I don't care what the headlines say," he said, voice thick. "I care about what you think when I knock on this door. I care about her smile when I show up. I care that you feel seen, not saved, just seen." Laya lowered her hand, her eyes red. "You really bought ramen?" she asked, and he nodded. "Chocolate too?" She laughed, a wet, broken laugh, and nodded toward the kitchen. "Then I guess you're staying for dinner." Graham exhaled in relief. Maisie tugged on his sleeve. "We can watch cartoons after we eat, but only if you like dragons." Graham grinned. "I love dragons." Laya stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching the two of them walk to the kitchen, their voices already merging with the hum of the microwave, and just like that, the silence in her apartment began to fade. It was a Sunday morning touched with gold light. The air was crisp, bearing the hint of fall around the edges. Leaves whispered in the breeze as they drifted down the sidewalk. There they were, the three of them walking side by side down a tree-lined path towards the park. Graham carried a small paper bag filled with cinnamon rolls from the corner bakery. Laya held a travel mug of tea, her free hand tucked loosely into her jacket pocket. Maisie skipped ahead, clutching chalk in her fingers, her curls bouncing with every step. There was no need for conversation. The silence was the good kind, the kind that only settles when people feel safe. At the park entrance, Maisie paused and dropped to the ground beside the walkway. She knelt and pulled out chalk and began to draw, blue, pink, yellow, green shapes blooming beneath her hands. 3 stick figures stood in a row, one tall, one medium, one tiny. Above them, in crooked, slanted letters, she wrote, "My family." Graham stared at it, and something in his chest expanded slowly, painfully, beautifully. Laya looked at him, her eyes shining in the morning light. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Graham stepped closer. He took the mug from her and placed it gently on the nearby bench. Then he turned, took a breath, and dropped to one knee on the sun-warmed pavement beside the drawing. There was no ring box, no big speech, just his eyes meeting hers, steady and clear. "Can I stay?" he said softly. "For every late moment of your life?" Laya's breath caught. Maisie looked up, a chalk smear on her cheek. "Does that mean you live with us now?" Graham smiled at her, then turned back to Laya. "Only if your mommy says yes." Laya stepped forward, bent down and cupped his face in both hands. "You already stayed through the worst," she whispered. "Of course you can stay for the rest." She kissed his forehead. He closed his eyes as if sealing the moment into memory. Maisie clapped her chalk-stained hands. "Yay! Can we have pancakes every Saturday now?" Graham laughed. "Deal, but only if you help flip them." "I'm very good at flipping," Maisie declared with utmost confidence. Laya stood and offered Graham her hand. He took it, brushing dust from his jeans. Together they turned back down the path, Laya on one side, Graham on the other, Maisie between them. They walked slowly. 3 shadows stretched across the pavement. 3 hands held tight. 3 hearts, different but whole, stitched together not by blood but by choice. They didn't talk about what came next, about titles, weddings, or what the world might say. They didn't need to, because sometimes the clearest love doesn't arrive with fireworks or fancy declarations. Sometimes it simply shows up, and it stays.